All right, cool. So the official title of my research is What My Professors Can Tell Us About Student Success. I'm currently a student in the Masters of Data Science program, and Dr. Iris Youngglass from the business school is mentoring me. So these are kind of the 4 steps and goals we started off with at the beginning of the year. The first of which was to build a universal effective script to crawl or web scrape Rate My Professor to gather student review data, specifically professors from the College of Charleston. And then the next step would be to organize these reviews into a structured database with the aim to join these reviews from Rate My Professor with student records given to us by the College of Charleston. Thirdly would be to perform natural language processing, which includes sentiment analysis and topic modeling on these reviews, and then to derive some quantitative variables from the qualitative content of these reviews with the aims to aggregate them per professor, and then to eventually concatenate this with the student records from the College of Charleston with an ultimate goal to predict student success based on their previous classmates' opinions and perception of the given professor. So to talk a little bit about the data, in total, we collected 19,000 reviews from 817 different professors at the College of Charleston. Within each review has a quality of instruction measure, the difficulty of the class, a date, the comment itself, and up to 3 tags. Tags are come from a predefined set of about 20 choices of like 1 to 5 word descriptions of your experience with the professor, which include hilarious or respected, tough grader, skip class, you won't pass, etc. Whereas the student records or the student class data from the College of Charleston contains about 450,000 rows dating back to 2016. All these students are completely anonymous, so I have no way to detect who is who. And within this data set includes the professor's name, the individual student GPA, his or her or their SAT/SAT score, if they have a midterm grade in the class. And then finally, the output variable would be the student's final grade in the class. This is kind of the methodology or the process that we went about. First, we cross-reference all of the professors that have at least 1 review in Rate My Professor with the student records given to me from the College of Charleston. And we're able to cut down on the amount of professors to about 817 to be exact. So we are able to remove all of the professors who have not taught since 2016 from Rate My Professor and only pull those reviews from those professors. So once we were able to pull all the reviews, which as I mentioned earlier, were about 19,000, we are able to derive some variables from the comment and the tags of each review. And then eventually we're going to aggregate these variables per professor to build that final model I was referring to earlier. This is just kind of a little descriptive relationship of our 3 main quantitative variables per review. The sentiment score was derived from the comment. I do not want to leave the breakout room. So the sentiment score was derived from the individual comment and is on a scale from -5 to 5. And as you can see from the correlation, there is a slightly negative relationship with difficulty, approximately -0.32. So if the student perceives the class to be more and more difficult, the lower the sentiment score will be. And then if we look at the relationship between sentiment and quality, there is a slightly positive relationship of about 0.57 So as the quality of instruction increases, the reviewee's sentiment will also increase. And lastly, looking at the correlation between quality and difficulty, which is about negative 0.45, is also an inverse relationship. As I was mentioning earlier, before we got cut, the sentiment score is now a quantitative variable derived from the individual reviewee's comment, which is on a scale of -5 to 5. And this correlation heat map kind of describes the relationship between these three variables of each review. So sentiment is positively related to the quality of instruction. So as the quality of instruction gets higher, which is on a scale of 0 to 5, the reviewees tend to have a higher sentiment score. Whereas the difficulty in the sentiment scores relationship is slightly negative, about negative 0.32. So as the class gets more and more difficult, most reviewees tend to have a lower sentiment score. And lastly, the quality and difficulty are also even more inversely related, about negative 0.45. So as the class gets more and more difficult, the reviewees tend to believe the quality of instruction gets lower. And if the quality of instruction is higher, they perceive the difficulty of the class to be lower. So this is kind of the correlation, the relationship between the three newly formed quantitative variables from each review. Which brings us to our next illustration, which is the average sentiment of Rate My Professor reviews along with the total Rate My Professor reviews since its origination in 2001. So as we can see, the number of reviews kind of go between 800 to up to 1,500 per year. And the average sentiment of each reviewee has kind of bounced between 0.8, 0.8, and 0.6, which is, not overwhelmingly positive, but it is positive, which is a good sign. And I mean, if we're looking at the totals, on average, about 10 to 12% of students each year do leave a review on Rate My Professor if they're only leaving one review per student. So this is an interesting illustration as well. And lastly, if we're looking at the more recent years, with the dawn of COVID, it doesn't seem to be that online instruction has had a major impact on students' sentiment on Rate My Professor either. So this visual goes back to those tags I was referring to. Each review can have up to 3 tags, and these tags come from a list of 20. And as we can see from the visual, a couple of major reoccurring tags on each review are gives good feedback, participation matters, accessible outside of class. I mean, each viewer can kind of make his or her own visualization or generalizations of this image, but I kind of attribute that to perhaps the average smaller class size of 16 to 1, I believe it is at College of Charleston. And I'm sure if we were to look at a different school with maybe a larger ratio, these tags would change accordingly. All right, so to kind of wrap up, the next steps would be to continue to play with these qualitative variables, looked for different metrics to derive from them, and then, as I was mentioning earlier, eventually aggregate these metrics per professor with the aim to re-input it into the student records table to then develop a predictive model to evaluate student success based on quantitative and qualitative variables pulled from Rate My Professor. And we're in this process of writing the methods and data section of it so far, and the dream obviously would be to publish.